We all think we know how the Trojan War ended. The Greeks built a wooden horse, they tricked the Trojans, they burned the city to the ground, and they sailed home as heroes. A clean victory, a storybook ending. Wrong. According to the ancient myths, the winners of the Trojan War suffered a fate far worse than the losers. Their legendary kings murdered in their baths, their invincible fleets shattered against the rocks. One by one, their kingdoms simply vanished. But here is the part that should keep you awake at night. This isn't just a myth. Archaeology tells us that shortly after the real Trojan War, the entire civilized world mysteriously collapsed. Today, let's look at how the curse of Troy was actually real history. In the ancient Greek world, a victory was never just a matter of swords and shields, it was a matter of the soul. As Troy burned, the Greeks did the unthinkable. They didn't just loot the treasury, they desecrated the temples. They tore women from the altars of the gods. The poets tell us that as the Greeks celebrated among the embers, the gods themselves turned away in disgust. Athena, once their greatest champion, became their most terrifying enemy. The wind died, the seas churned. The journey home, the nostoi, was no longer a return, it was a sentence of death. Consider Agamemnon, the king of kings, the man who led 1,000 ships. He survived 10 years of blood and bone on the plains of Troy. He sailed home expecting a parade, expecting the crown of a conqueror. Instead, he found a nightmare. His own wife, Clytemnestra, had waited a decade with a blade in her heart. He didn't die on the battlefield. He was butchered in his own bath, trapped in a net, defenseless. This wasn't just a murder. It was a symbol. The political heart of Greece had stopped beating. The great king was dead, and there was no one to take his place. Then there is Odysseus, the smartest man in the world. For 10 years he wandered the edge of the map. He watched his ships splinter. He watched his men be eaten, drowned, and cursed. By the time he reached the shores of Ithaca, he was a ghost, a beggar in his own land. He returned to a house filled with enemies, suitors eating his food and plotting to kill his son. His victory had cost him everything. Every man he ever led was at the bottom of the sea. One by one, the stories repeat. Diomedes, exiled. Menelaus, shipwrecked in Egypt. Lesser Ajax, struck by lightning and drowned. Almost no Greek hero got a happily ever after. The poets were trying to tell us something we are only now beginning to understand. The war didn't just break the city of Troy, it broke something fundamental in the world itself. For centuries, we thought the nostoi, the tragic returns of the kings, were just stories, tales told by fireside to explain why the heroic age ended. But in the late 19th century, the shovels of archaeologists began to hit something strange. Everywhere they dug, from the mainland of Greece to the islands of the Levant, they found the same thing, a thick, black layer of ash. At Mycenae, at Tiryns, at Pylos, the palaces didn't just fall into disuse, they were burned. The stones themselves were scorched by fires so intense they turned the limestone to lime. We have found the final records of these kingdoms. They are written on clay tablets called Linear B. Usually these tablets are boring, lists of sheep, jars of oil, and taxes. But the final tablets, they are a window into a world in a state of total panic. In the city of Pylos, the final tablets record the Watchers by the Sea. They were frantically moving troops to the coast. They were desperate. They were looking for something coming from the horizon. And then the record stops. The palace was torched so quickly that the clay tablets were accidentally baked and preserved in the fire. It was a literal snapshot of the end of the world. This wasn't just a Greek problem. This was a systemic collapse. Imagine a row of dominoes stretching across the entire Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey, a superpower that rivaled Egypt, collapsed so completely that people forgot they ever existed for 3,000 years. The trade routes vanished, the tin from the east, the copper from the west, the bronze in the Bronze Age was gone. If you couldn't make bronze, you couldn't make tools, you couldn't make weapons, you couldn't survive. Within 50 years, the population of Greece plummeted by 75%. People abandoned the coastlines, they fled into the mountains. Literacy, the very ability to write, was simply deleted from the human brain for 3 centuries. The Curse of Troy wasn't a story about a wooden horse. It was a story about the day the lights went out across the world. If the world was a house of cards, who pushed it? The ancient Egyptians, the only superpower to survive the chaos, gave us a name that still sends a chill through the halls of history. The Sea Peoples. They didn't come from one place. They were a coalition of the displaced, a ghost fleet of warriors and their families appearing on the horizon without warning. They didn't just raid, they migrated. They brought their ox carts and their wives. They weren't looking for gold. They were looking for a new home, because their old one was gone. Pharaoh Ramesses III faced them in a final desperate stand at the delta of the Nile. On the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, he carved the only pictures we have of these invaders. They wear strange feathered headdresses, they carry round shields and long straight swords. They fought with the ferocity of men who had nothing left to lose. Ramesses won the battle, but the cost was total. Egypt survived, but it was a shadow of its former glory. It retreated behind its borders, and the great age of the pharaohs began its long, slow death. But here is the mystery that haunts us. Who were they? Modern DNA and archaeology suggest some were from Italy, some from the islands of the Mediterranean, and some were from Greece. The Sea Peoples weren't just the cause of the collapse, they were the result of it. The winners of the Trojan War, now homeless, hungry, and desperate, had become the very monsters they once fought against. When the smoke finally cleared, the world was unrecognizable. For 300 years, the Mediterranean went silent. No one wrote poems, no one built monuments. The grand palaces of the Bronze Age became haunted ruins that the later Greeks believed were built by Cyclopses, because they couldn't imagine mere humans achieving such things. The Trojan War wasn't just a battle for a beautiful queen. It was the spark that hit the tinder of a fragile, overconnected world. It reminds us that civilization is not a permanent state, it is a fragile agreement. Today, we live in a world more connected than the Bronze Age kings could have ever dreamed. Our supply chains span the globe, our communication is instant, our dependency on one another is total. We look at the curse of Troy and we see a myth, but the stones tell a different story. They tell us that even the mightiest empires can vanish in a single generation if the dominoes begin to fall. We all think we know how our story ends. We think we are the heroes. We think we are safe. But history has a way of repeating its darkest chapters. The question isn't if the world will change, it's whether we will be the ones to survive the Nostoi, or if we are simply building the ruins for the next civilization to wonder about. Sleep well while the lights are still on.